Hello, everyone. So yeah, I'm Wei Jie. I'm a RAS PhD student, and today I will giving this presentation. I will show rethinking the false positive, which is from the ECG-based diagnosis model, and see if it can do early prediction signal. Louder. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. I can try. Yeah. Yeah. Today I will show the rethinking the false positive and from ECG-based diagnosis models. See if this can do early prediction or early signals for the future heart failure risk. So I found that there is a smoke detector. It's above here. Like, let's think of a smoke detector. It's beep when you are cooking, and this is the false positive, or it's missing a fast fire and a low smoke scenario. It's a false negative. And we think about if this can be using as an ECG diagnosis models, also showing a false positive. It's an early signal for the elaborative risk for future heart failure risk. So here's our background. In our 2023 NPJ papers, we proposed ECG ResNet multi-label models for over 15 cardiac diseases in Alberta Health Service data. And we get a very good performance. And why we talk about heart failure? Because heart failure affects tens of millions of people worldwide. Also, it has increasing economic boundary in the health system. And if we can do early predictions for this heart failure, so it can improve the system and frame. So in our models, our heart failure models getting 87% AUROC in our machine learning ECG models, and the output is like a probability if the patient have heart failure, and it's not a standard way. So doctors or clinical experts expected a positive or negative label for this outcome. So this is what we choose. We maximize the Uden index and go through all the thresholds in the training set to getting the best threshold and apply in the holdout set or testing set. Then we can get in these accuracy, precision, recall, everything rely on the binary labels. But it's also giving our confusion matrix for this four cohort, like a true positive, true negative, false positive, and false negative. And it's a misclassifications when we look at these. And it's clear. Let's talk about the false positive. False positive means ECG machine learning models will think this ECG has a higher probability to getting heart failure. But the doctors look at their confirmation diagnosis code. They didn't find the patient meets the requirement or meet the standard like a rejection fraction levels or the lab test level to have the heart failure. But the machine learning model showing, okay, this patient has higher risk. So let's define in our models how we define the heart failure definitions. So in the diagnosis models, we're using a broader heart failure definitions, and these IC code is given by the clinical experts. And we also checking all the diagnosis code if this code exists there. And our goal is let our diagnosis model captures full information of the heart failure patterns. But later we were talking about, we look at the follow-up period, and we're using a narrow down definitions. It's only using I50, which is the most precise one, and also checking if it's in the primary or the major diagnosis code. We want to make sure our follow-up future event, the patient go back to hospital, primarily driven by the heart failure diseases. So this is a two definition. And we continue talking about the follow-up term. So if patients come back to the hospital, like patient A and patient B, after ECG test, so we will have the event indicator equal to true. And the TEM is the distance between the ECG date to the admission of heart failure event date. And in the patient C, if we didn't find the patient have a heart failure event until the study end, so we will have a false indicator here. And we're also choosing the maximum observation window, like 30 days from ECG date to study end in the TEM. Then we're using a very standard or the primary survival function. It's called the Kaplan Meier estimator. It's just using 3 features, which is the TEM, when the event happened, and the number of the event happened at TEM T, and also the individual who at risk at that TEM. So here's one example. If TEM equal to 10, and we can see only patient B have the event at the TEM 10, and all these 3 patients still are able to have the risk at the TEM 10, so N equals 3. And we keep doing that to get a survival curve like this. So we will have a Kaplan Meier curve for all the cohort for the heart failure feature events. Let's go back to our previous confusion matrix. We will have these 4 different cohorts. And I can draw all 4 different Kaplan Meier curves for this cohort, which is, you can see the yellow one is a false positive, and the green one is a true negative. Both of the cohort is a doctor didn't give a label or diagnosis code for the patient, say he has heart failure. But the difference is in this yellow cohort is the machine learning models showing the patient has higher risk in heart failure, or say it's diagnosed this patient already has a heart failure. And we can see the yellow one, if the survival curve is decreasing faster, which means they have a higher risk in the future. So the yellow one is faster than the green, which means they will have higher risk in the future. And we also run some statistical tests. If unadjusted, then every pattern is significantly different. If adjusted, then you can we say the false positive and false negative, they are non-significant different.
Zero, you think they did not have heart failure.
Yes, yes. Yes, yeah, yes. So this cohort is defined when in the TEM equal to 0, when they do the ECG test, we're only using the information at the TEM T equal to 0 or TEM equal to 0. But lucky for us, we have the follow-up information. We can tracking what happened for the patient after this ECG test. Is he or she have the higher risk to have heart failure, primary reason, revisit to the hospital. And we can see the false positive has a higher risk than the true negative. And here's another scenario, like for the patient D. Patient D is dead without heart failure event between the ECG test and death date. In the previous scenario, we just treat this as a censor, like a death censor, but it's actually is another event because we don't know what happened after death. So our strategy is using an event number to replace a Boolean indicator. So we're using heart failure as event 1 and death as event 2. And the TEM is the patient event test date until the death date. Then we have an extra 2 Kaplan Meier curve, heart failure or the death Kaplan Meier curve. And we also can look at these 4 cohorts. We will have true positive, false positive, true negative, false negative. And the same story, same pattern is we finding the false positive cohorts has a higher risk in the heart failure or death than the true negative. And the statistical significant difference is same pattern as well. However, here's a challenging in the Kaplan Meier curve for the heart failure. So first, if we consider death as kind of a censor, it's against the non-informative censor assumptions, and also the death is caused overestimate heart failure incidence. So our choice is using the Aalen Johansen. This is a computing risk non-parametric estimators. And we estimate the cumulative incidence function for each cause, like the death and the heart failure separately. And we can get in their cumulative incidence functions or the cumulative hazard. So this is what I do. I look at these 4 cohorts and to calculate their cumulative hazard area. So the red one is a death and the blue one is heart failure. And what we can see, the true positive has the highest cumulative risk in the heart failure, and the true negative is has the smallest, which makes sense. And the false positive, we also can see it has a higher cumulative risk area here. And in order to compare within our previous plot, we calculate survival probability for heart failure in the computing risk adjust. And this is 1 minus heart failure cumulative incidence functions. And the yellow one is a false positive, and also it's getting higher risk than the true negative. So oh, okay. Yeah, yes. Oh, sorry. Yes, here is a cumulative incidence functions, which means if increasing, which means that people has accumulated risk when they died by looking at all the cohorts. And they because they want independent with another cause of the scenario. So the death is a cumulative incidence, and the CIF of heart failure is cumulative incidence, and some of them is the CDF of the heart failure or death. Yeah, and this is the plot I want to show is survival probability for in the computing risk for the heart failure scenario. So it's a death adjust heart failure future risk. And we also run a fine-grained models, which comparing the different groups. And we can get in the order is the false positive has highest risk, then followed by false positive and false negative, and the true negative is the lowest risk. After adjusted within agent sex, the false positive and false negative, they don't have significant difference, but they still have higher risk than true negative. This is our data set. And we want to see if it generalizes for the other data set. So we look at one famous public data set called the MIMIC. And we replicated our work for the diagnosed work in the MIMIC data set. And our performance is still high. So AUROC is going to 90s and also higher F1 score. And also, I look at the MIMIC data set and draw these Kaplan Meier curve. Same things, I look at the Kaplan Meier curve for these 4 different cohorts. And the pattern a little bit different, but what we want still here is the false positive has higher risk, the true negative. In these doctors say they don't have a heart failure disease, but our machine learning model showing higher probability to get diagnosis heart failure, they will have higher future risk. And this is adjusted Aalen Johansen, adjust the CIF curve. And we can pattern is still similar. The false positive is a higher risk. And this is a cumulative incidence function again. The true positive get high risk in the CIF, and the true negative has a low risk, has a low cumulative incidence areas, and the false positive is has high risk in the heart failure. K is the event type. Sorry, in the formula K is the event type. Either we're using the heart failure as 1 and death is 2. So if K equal to 1, it's the blue area, it's k equal 2, it's a death area. Then we accumulated them to get a CDF function, which is a 1 minus a survival function, some survival probability. And we also rerun our fine-grained model for the mimic data set. And before adjusted, it's true positive has the highest risk, true negative has the lowest risk. And after adjusted, true positive and false negative has a high, and the true negative has a low. Yeah. So this is bring us a questions is we see time equal to 0, and the diagnosis models classify the patient into different cohorts. Even the doctor doesn't say the patient have kind of diseases, but in these false positive, we can see they have higher risk in the future. Is that means a diagnosis model also estimated a future risk? So this is what we're going to do. We're using 2 evaluation metrics, which designed for checking the future risk or prognosis model. One is the index, another is a dynamic time-dependent ROC. And in the following data, I will remove these ECG, which is within 24 hours, they will have a death or censor. I will remove these and keep the time bigger than 0. In the index, so this is a concurrent index. How it does work is, you see this star, which means this is like the ground truth, which means the person died at exactly that time. And this triangle is our estimated time. If look at the first example, this green patient's ground truth time is earlier than this blue patient's. And in our prediction order, it's also green is earlier than blue. And this is a correct order, concurrent order. And look at the second example, which is the blue star. The true time is earlier than this yellow time. But in our estimate is reverse order. The yellow predicted earlier than the blue. So this is the inconcurrent. And the concurrent index is to compare all the comparable pairs and see how many of them are correct pair order. This is the index. And we also train a baseline Cox model using these ground truths of the following heart failure time and event indicators. And because this model know in the training set when the event happen in the future, but our diagnosis model doesn't know. Our diagnosis model only know in the training set, if the doctor assigned this ECG as heart failure or not. But in the index, diagnosis how I calculate index is a probability higher than I consider this patient has a higher probability to revisit the hospital. And the probability is lower, we consider this is a low probability or not recent visit. So when we compare the C-index, we can see the diagnosis model's C-index is much higher than our baseline model. So has some prognosis abilities. And we look at the open source dataset, which is the mimic dataset, and the story is the same. So we look at all different cohorts and look at the C-index between the diagnosis models and the baseline models, and all the C-index is higher in the diagnosis models. So this indicates our diagnosis model have some abilities to estimate the future risk, at least know who has higher risk in the future. Also, the second evaluation metrics we use is a dynamic time-dependent ROC curve. What this do is it's giving a certain time points and see if the patient, the risk, compare all the patient risk. If the patient have event before the time or after time, if the order is correct. And if the patient censored before the time t, they will have the inverse probability censoring weight to given the patient who have the event before. And we look at these 3 time points, which is clinical interesting time points, the 30 days, half year, and 1 year. And we can see all the these 3 time points, the AUROC is all higher than the baseline Cox. And there's a story is the same for the mimic data set. And all the 3, like 30 days, half year, and 1 year, their index are all higher than the baseline model. Then, like my supervisor Russ gave me a question. If you want to predict some things, why you don't train that one at the beginning? Why you see what the diagnosis can do? And this is what I do. Is in this diagnosis model, we're using ResNet architectures, and output is a diagnosis probabilities. Like I'm thinking about that. This is kind of to see how much similar for this input ECG compare with these heart failure ECG inside the training set. If it's similar, then the probability is higher. If it's not similar, then the probability is lower. And I updated this MLP layer to Cox models. And this is output is a hazard, which is a future risk of event. And this means a higher risk means they will have a closer event time. They will have an event earlier than is the low risk ECGs. Let's compare with them. Yeah, because prognosis model is designed, hazard is designed for who is coming earlier, whose risk is higher. So the index is higher than the diagnosis model. It's not surprising for me. And I'm looking at the cumulative dynamic time-dependent ROC. And I realize the blue one is the diagnosis model's curve, and the green one is a prognosis model. And the prognosis model is better in the much larger features, and the blue or diagnosis models has higher performance in the recent features, which means in the 30 days or half year and 1 year, or not 1 year, 30 days and half year, the AUROC for diagnosis model is higher than the prognosis model. And let's see about the mimic data set. And the story is the same, which is the prognosis models have a higher index than the diagnosis models. But when we go into the time-dependent ROC curve, we can see 1 month, 6 months, and 1 year, all 3 time points, the AUROC is all higher than the prognosis model. They got better performance in the recent feature. And we go into another cohort, which is early prediction or detection. In these cohorts, all the ECG only be identified, they don't have heart failure diseases. So in this cohort, we only have false positive and true negative. And how we define that is ECG without heart failure clinical history. In order to get these, we define a washout period. Say it's no heart failure code in the clinical history. Why not excluded heart failure clinical person born? Because we only have a 13-year data set, and we don't have the data since born. And why not exclude the heart failure clinical history since 2007? Because some ECG retrieving at earlier time, and some ECG retrieval at later time. And we don't want to get a bias for that. So we changing our definition is say, yes, ECG without a recent heart failure clinical history, which means there's a early prediction cohort. And our washout period also say they don't have this heart failure code in 1 year before the ECG acquisition time. And I also do examples for these for patients. Let's to be clear what we getting from the cohorts. For patient A, it has clinical history just before the index event, and patient B has heart failure at ECG index stage. Patient C has a recent heart failure clinical history, and patient D has a long time ago clinical history. So here we only consider patient D is a early prediction cohort. And in our following result, we're showing these patients don't have that clinical history. And when he will future heart failure risk will happen. So the story is still here is prognosis models. When we testing the prognosis model, the index is higher than the diagnosis models. It's not surprising. But let's see the time-dependent AUROC is still holds. You can see in the short term, the diagnosis models getting higher AUROC than the prognosis models. And it's 30 days, half year is probably true. And the story is the same for the mimic data set. The mimic data set has the prognosis model has a higher C-index than the diagnosis models. But still, in the time-dependent AUROC curve, we can see in the 30 days, half year, and 1 year scenario, all the AUROC is higher than a prognosis models. So our conclusion is when the smoke detector starting to beep, it doesn't mean there is it not means there is a fire, but it's saying there's a signal for an elevator risk in the future. And I want to bring this same for the machine learning diagnosis models. While a diagnosis model is saying this patient or this patient at that time have a higher risk for certain diseases, it doesn't mean it's like an early warning, even it's inconcurrent within doctors confirmed diseases, but it's showing there will be elevated risk for the certain diseases in the future. Yeah, because heart failure is defined by the rejection fraction scores, and we don't know what the rejection fraction scores, but the model have seen what the real heart failure ECG pattern look like. And it may know something potentially we haven't defined in the textbook, but they seeing it has a similarity within a real heart failure scenario. And our takeaway is the first post here is kind of uncover a potential risk or potential pattern. It's not in the current standard diagnostic criteria. And secondly is our diagnosis model output can be served as a powerful prognosis indicator for a recent feature. So for the doctor didn't finding that, but the machine learning model seeing, okay, they have a similar pattern, they may revisit the hospital in a recent feature. And the third one is when we do some diagnosis model evaluations, especially we look at the current what we do is we compare within the doctor's ground truth labels. When doctors say yes, he has the diseases, or say no, he don't have diseases, we kind of compare what the doctor said. But this is provided another framework if we have the real follow-up outcome. If the model is saying this patient have a certain diseases, and in the future or recent future, the patient go back to the hospital because of certain diseases, I think this is also can showing the performance, a good performance for a diagnosis model. So this is our roadmap. We're starting our previous diagnosis model papers, and we choosing using user index, choosing the best threshold for the true positive, false negative, false positive, and false negative. And we look at these Kaplan Meier patterns, and we realize the false positive showing a higher risk than the true negative. Like the machine say this patient has higher risk, higher than machine says the patient doesn't have this disease. And we want to confirm, okay, if the diagnosis models is doing a prediction in the future. And we showing on these two very big data set in AHS and in mimic data set, and showing both of them has a high risk in the recent future. Yeah, this is all my presentations. Thank you.